Hello, Pack. The Alpha King's wolf had not slept in 3 years, not since the night the Queen's breath went quiet in the East Wing, and every torch in Ironhall burned down to nothing before anyone thought to relight them. The wolf had been at her bedside. It had watched the door for 11 days. When there was nothing left to watch for, it simply stopped sleeping, stopped eating more than survival required, stood at the king's shoulder during every council session, every border negotiation, every ceremony it was required to attend, with its eyes open and its ears flat, and the particular stillness of something that has decided the world is no longer safe enough for rest. 3 years. And then a weaver arrived at the servants' gate with a loom strapped to a borrowed cart and a commission she hadn't asked for. And the wolf closed its eyes. We're going to talk about what that meant, and what it cost, and what one man had to finally say out loud before it could mean anything at all. Let's begin. Vesna arrived at Ironhall on the first morning of the frost season, which was not an auspicious time to arrive anywhere in the northern reaches. The road from the lowlands had been 3 days of mud hardening into ice, and the cart she'd borrowed from the Weavers' Guild Hall in Morvain had a wheel that needed attention she hadn't had time to give it. She arrived with her loom, her shuttle case, her 2 baskets of thread, one for the warded work, one for ordinary use, and a commission letter she'd read so many times the fold lines had worn through. The commission was simple in the way that impossible things are sometimes described simply. The great hall tapestries of Ironhall had been taken down after the Queen died. They had not been replaced. The King's steward had written to the Weavers' Guild 6 months ago, requesting someone capable of warding work, the kind that required not just skill, but the older knowledge, the thread singing that most weavers her age had never bothered to learn. Vesna had learned it from her grandmother. She was, according to the guild master's letter of recommendation, the only one who could do what Ironhall needed. She was also, according to the guild master's private note to her, the only one willing to go. The servants' gate was open when she arrived. A young man with a steward's ring on his finger was waiting in the courtyard, which she appreciated. What she did not expect was the wolf. It was standing at the far end of the courtyard near the stable wall, which put it perhaps 30 feet from the gate. Large, larger than she'd expected, though she'd known intellectually that the king's personal wolf was not a common animal. Gray-white with the particular density of something that had been built by northern winters rather than bred in a kennel, it was watching the gate. When the cartwheel crossed the threshold, the wolf's head came up. Vesna didn't notice. She was managing the wheel, which had chosen this moment to finally give up its remaining dignity, and she was focused on bringing the cart to a stop before it listed entirely sideways. She climbed down, assessed the damage, and crouched to look at the axle with the expression of someone who has done this before and is not pleased to be doing it again. The steward was already moving toward her, already beginning the formal welcome. He stopped. The wolf had crossed the courtyard, not at a run, at the measured, deliberate pace of something that had decided where it was going and saw no reason to hurry. It came to the edge of the cart, lowered its nose toward the baskets of thread, and then, slowly, with the particular gravity of a thing that has never done anything without intention, it lay down, not at the king's heel, not at the stable wall, at Vesna's feet. She looked up from the axle. The wolf looked back at her. Its eyes were the color of old iron, and they were calm in a way that she did not yet have language for, because she had not yet learned that calm was not a state this wolf had been capable of for 3 years. "Right," she said, to no one in particular. "Hello." The steward had gone very still, from the upper corridor window that overlooked the courtyard, the one the king used when he wanted to observe arrivals without being observed himself. There was a long pause, then the sound of a man turning away from a window and walking slowly back down a stone hall. The wolf's name, she learned from the steward over the course of that first afternoon, was Ash. This was not a formal name. It was what the kitchen staff called him, because the king had never given him one publicly, and people needed something to say when they were trying to explain why a wolf, the size of a small horse, was sleeping in the corridor outside the weaving room they'd assigned her. The king called him nothing, at least not in front of witnesses. He simply moved, and Ash moved with him, and that had been the arrangement for 7 years. Vesna set up her loom near the hearth in the weaving room, which was a generous space with good north light and a fireplace large enough to walk into. She spent the first afternoon sorting thread and cataloging the damage to the old tapestry frames, which were still mounted on the walls but bare, the hooks still there, the shapes of the old pieces still faintly visible in the stone where the color had protected it from weather. She could see from the dimensions that the original tapestries had been significant work, warded at every border, the kind of thing that took years. Ash did not leave. He arranged himself near the hearth with his chin on his paws and watched her work. When she moved to the far wall to measure the frames, he tracked her without lifting his head. When she returned to the loom, he settled again. She found after an hour that she had stopped noticing him the way you stop noticing a sound that is constant and benign. He was simply there. The room felt different with him in it, steadier somehow, as if the walls had decided to hold. She did not know then what the steward knew, that Ash had not chosen a room since the queen died, that he had stood in corridors and doorways and the edges of great halls, always positioned between the king and whatever the king was facing, never still enough to be called resting, that the kitchen staff had tried in the early months to coax him into the warmth with food and quiet voices, and he had accepted the food and ignored the warmth, and eventually they had stopped trying. She did not know any of this yet. She knew only that there was a wolf asleep by her hearth, and that the fire was warm, and that the commission was going to be harder than the letter had suggested. She filed the rest away for later. On the second day, she met the king. It was not a formal introduction. She was in the east corridor measuring the light at different hours. Warded thread responds to direction, and she needed to know which frames would catch the morning. When she turned a corner, and he was simply there. Tall, the kind of tall that changes the proportions of a corridor, dark-haired, with the gray starting at the temples that comes not from age but from the specific variety of exhaustion that doesn't sleep off. He was dressed plainly for a king, no ceremony in his clothes, just the dark wool and leather of someone who had been working and intended to keep working. He had a sheaf of papers under one arm and the expression of a man who had been somewhere in his own head and had not expected company. Ash was at his heel, or rather, Ash had been at his heel. The moment Vesna came around the corner, Ash moved, not dramatically, just a step and a half to the left, which put him between her and the king, and then he stopped and looked at her with those iron-colored eyes, and his tail moved once. The king looked at his wolf, then he looked at her. "You're the weaver," he said. "Vesna," she said. "Yes." A pause. He looked at Ash again. Something moved in his expression. Not much, just a fraction. And then it settled back into the careful neutrality she would come to recognize as his default. "The commission letter outlined the scope," he said. "If you have questions, the steward can—" "I have one question," she said. He waited. "The original tapestries." What happened to them? The pause was longer this time. They were taken down. I can see that. I mean, where are they now? Because if they still exist, I'd like to see the warding patterns before I design the new ones. It would save 3 weeks of work. He looked at her for a moment with the expression of someone recalibrating. The south storeroom, he said. 3rd row. Ask the steward for the key. Thank you. He nodded once and moved to pass her. Ash stayed a moment longer, looking at her with that particular stillness, and then followed. She watched them go. She noted, without quite deciding to, that the king had not told her the tapestries were inaccessible, or that the storeroom was off limits, or that she should direct her questions elsewhere. He had answered her directly. She filed that away. The storeroom was cold and smelled of cedar and old wool. The tapestries were rolled and wrapped in linen, labeled in a hand she didn't recognize. She unwrapped the first one carefully, spread it across the stone floor, and sat down cross-legged to study it. The warding was extraordinary, not the style she'd been taught. Older, more complex. The kind of work that took a weaver who had spent years thinking about what the thread was actually doing, rather than simply following pattern. Whoever had made these had understood the theory, not just the technique. She spent 2 hours on the floor with the tapestry, tracing patterns with one finger without touching the thread, making notes in the small book she kept in her apron pocket. When she finally looked up, Ash was sitting in the doorway. She hadn't heard him come. "How long have you been there?" she asked. He blinked, slowly, the way cats do. "Right," she said. She looked back at the tapestry. "Did she make these?" "The queen." Ash made no sound. She hadn't expected one. But he moved into the room and came to stand beside her and look down at the tapestry with her. And she had the strange and completely irrational sense that the answer was yes. "They're very good," she said. "I'm going to have a hard time matching them." She rolled the tapestry back carefully and reached for the next one. Ash lay down beside her and put his chin on his paws, and the storeroom was cold, but less so than it had been. The dowager, the king's mother, Lady Marit, found Vesna on the 4th day. She was a small woman with the posture of someone who had decided, at some point in her youth, that she would take up exactly as much space as she chose and no one would comment on it. She arrived in the weaving room without announcement and stood in the doorway for a moment, looking at the loom, the thread baskets, the notes pinned to the wall, and then at Ash, who was in his now customary position by the hearth. "He's sleeping," she said. Vesna looked up. "He does that, yes?" "No," Lady Marit said, and her voice had the particular weight of someone correcting a misunderstanding that matters. "He doesn't. He hasn't. Not since Alara died." Vesna set down her shuttle. "The Queen. My daughter-in-law." Lady Marit came into the room and sat, without being invited, in the chair near the window. She looked at Ash for a long moment. "He was hers first, you know, before Caelum. She found him as a pup on the border road and brought him home in her apron. He transferred his loyalty when she died, but he hasn't been easy since." Vesna looked at the wolf. His sides were moving slowly. His eyes were closed. "I didn't do anything," she said. "He just came in." "Yes." Lady Marit looked at her with the direct assessment of someone who has been watching people for a long time and has stopped bothering to pretend otherwise. "That's rather the point." She left shortly after, without explaining what she meant. Vesna watched her go, then looked back at Ash, then at the loom. She picked up her shuttle and went back to work. On the 5th day, she was in the great hall taking measurements when the king came in. He didn't announce himself. He came in from the side door and stopped when he saw her, ladder against the wall, measuring tape in hand, notes tucked under her arm. And then he came further in rather than leaving, which she registered without comment. "The frames in the east corner are pulling away from the wall," she said, without looking down. "About half an inch. It'll need to be fixed before I mount anything there, or the weight will make it worse." A pause. "I'll have the steward arrange it. The stone needs to be repointed first. It's the mortar, not the mount." She came down the ladder one rung and made a note. "If you point it now and let it cure for 2 weeks, I can mount after. It won't delay the commission significantly." She heard him cross the hall. He stopped below the ladder and looked up at the corner she'd indicated. She watched his face from above, the slight shift of his jaw as he assessed the damage, the way his eyes moved over the stonework with the attention of someone who actually cared about the building, rather than just what it represented. "My father's masons did that work," he said. "It was already pulling when I inherited." "Old problem, then." "Most of them are." She climbed down the rest of the ladder and found him closer than she'd expected. Not inappropriately so, just the natural result of him having moved toward the wall to look and her having come down. He stepped back. She noted that he did it without making it a production. "The warding patterns in the stored tapestries," she said. "Did the queen design them herself or work from older sources?" Something moved across his face. Not grief, exactly. The particular stillness of something that has decided not to move. "Both," he said. "She had her grandmother's pattern books. She adapted them." "Do the pattern books still exist?" "Yes." "I'd like to see them if that's possible. The adaptations she made are more sophisticated than anything in the Guild archive. I want to understand the logic before I try to extend it." He looked at her for a moment with that expression she was beginning to catalog, the one that meant he was deciding something and doing it carefully and not going to tell her what it was. "I'll have them sent to the weaving room," he said. "Thank you." He nodded and turned to go. Ash, who had been lying near the door in his now familiar way, stood and fell into step beside him. But at the door, the wolf paused, looked back at Vesna, then followed the king out. She stood in the empty hall with her measuring tape and looked at the bare frames on the wall. The room wanted something in it. She could feel that the way you feel a missing word in a sentence. She went back to her notes and started sketching the first pattern. The pattern books arrived the next morning, delivered by a young man who handled them with the care of someone who had been specifically instructed to. There were 4 of them, small, leather-bound, the pages dense with diagrams and annotations in 2 different hands. The older hand was precise and formal. The newer one, the queen's, she assumed, was looser, faster, full of marginal questions and crossed-out attempts, and small triumphant notes where something had finally worked. Vesna sat with them all morning and did not touch her loom. By afternoon, she had understood something about the warding logic that she hadn't seen before, a structural principle that the queen had discovered independently and documented in her own terms, which were different from the guild terms, but arrived at the same truth from a different direction. It was the kind of discovery that made her want to find the person who'd made it and ask them 20 questions. She couldn't do that. She sat with that for a moment, and then she picked up her own pen and started writing in her own book, translating the queen's notation into something she could work from. Ash was asleep by the hearth. She had stopped noticing this in the way you stop noticing your own heartbeat. He was simply part of the room now, and the room was warmer for it, and she worked better in the warm. She was in the kitchen on the 6th evening. She'd developed the habit of coming down late when the main cooking was done, because the kitchen fire was the best in the keep, and the night cook, A woman named Berta had opinions about thread tension that Vesna found unexpectedly useful. When the king came in, he stopped at the doorway. Berta did not stop stirring. "My lord," she said, in the tone of someone who has been saying those 2 words for 30 years and has made her peace with them. "I couldn't sleep," he said. It was the most unguarded thing Vesna had heard him say. He said it to Berta, not to her, and it had the quality of something that had been said before, a small established ritual between a king and the woman who had fed him since childhood. Berta pointed at the bench by the fire without looking up. He sat. Vesna was at the far end of the table with her pattern book and a cup of something Berta had handed her without asking. She looked at the king. He looked at her. Neither of them said anything about the strangeness of this. Ash came in and lay down at the hearth, which was now somewhat crowded with the king on the bench and Vesna at the table and a wolf taking up the middle third of the floor. No one commented. "The pattern books," Vesna said after a while. "She was working on something when she died. There's an unfinished sequence in the last one." He was quiet for a moment. "She was designing something for the heir's room," he said. "We didn't have an heir yet. She was planning ahead. The logic of it is almost complete. I could finish it if you wanted. It would take some interpretation. I'd have to make decisions she hadn't made yet, but the bones are there." He looked at the fire. "Yes," he said. "I'd like that." Berta set something in front of him without ceremony. He ate it without looking at it, which was the behavior of a man who has been eating without tasting for some time. Vesna watched him for a moment, then went back to her book. The fire burned. Ash breathed slowly on the floor. Berta moved around them both like water around stones, and the kitchen was warm, and outside the frost was doing what frost does in the northern reaches, which is everything it wants. Tao. The council session happened on the 8th day, and she was not supposed to be part of it. She had come to the great hall early to check the mortar work. The masons had started the repointing, and she wanted to see the progress before the day's work. And the council had arrived while she was still up the ladder. They had not noticed her. Or rather, some of them had, and decided she was a servant, and therefore invisible, which was a decision she had made use of before. There were 7 of them, plus the king. The king sat at the head of the table. Ash was at his heel, standing, which Vesna had learned meant the king was not at ease. The business of the first half-hour was routine: border reports, supply counts, the usual machinery of a functioning territory. She worked quietly and listened without appearing to. Then a man she didn't know, older, with the careful enunciation of someone who has learned to make reasonable-sounding statements do unreasonable work, said, "The matter of the weaver." She went still on the ladder. "The commission is straightforwardst." The king said. His voice was flat, final. She had learned to read the difference between that flatness and his ordinary quiet, and this was the former. "The commission is one matter," the council member said. "The wolf's behavior is another." Silence. Ash has been observed sleeping in the weaving room on 6 consecutive nights. He followed the woman into the south storeroom. He is, by all accounts, not leaving her vicinity for more than the hours he is required to accompany you. A pause, precise and deliberate. "The pack reads signs, my lord. The staff is already talking." "Let them talk," the king said. The implications of the king's bondwolf choosing an outside woman are not small. If there is a bond forming— "There is no bond," the king said. The words were flat and final, and offered no explanation and required none. But Vesna, on the ladder, noted that he had said there is no bond, not there is no connection, not the wolf simply likes her, not this is nothing. There is no bond, which was a specific denial of a specific thing. She filed it away. "The guildwoman's contract runs 6 months," another council member said, more gently. "Perhaps when the work is complete—" "The work is not complete," the king said, "and the wolf's habits are not a council matter." The session moved on. Vesna finished her measurements and came down from the ladder and left through the side door, and no one stopped her because no one had officially noticed she was there. She went to the weaving room and sat at her loom, and did not begin working immediately. Bond wolf. She turned the phrase over. She knew what a bond wolf was in the abstract. The king's personal wolf, the one that carried his instincts in a body he couldn't fully govern. She had not thought about what it meant, that this one had been sleeping at her hearth. She thought about it now. After a while, she picked up her shuttle and began the first row of the new pattern. The thread was the dark gold of the queen's original border, and it caught the light in a way that suggested it was doing more than one thing at once. Lady Marit came to the weaving room that evening with 2 cups of tea and the expression of someone who has decided a conversation is going to happen whether or not it is convenient. "You heard the council," she said. It was not a question. "I was on a ladder," Vesna said. "They didn't look up. Men rarely do." Lady Marit sat. She handed Vesna one of the cups. "What they said about the bond wolf, you understood what they meant." "I understood the words. Ash has not slept since Ilara died. You know this now. What you may not know is that a bond wolf that stops sleeping is carrying something its alpha cannot put down. Caelum has not. He has not allowed himself to." She paused, which was the first time Vesna had seen her pause. He loved Ilara, but the bond between them was not a fated one. It was chosen, deliberate, built over years. And when she died, he decided that the deliberate kind was the only kind he would trust, because the other kind, the involuntary kind, felt like something he could not afford to survive. Vesna looked at her tea. "Ash doesn't agree," Lady Marit said. "Ash is a wolf. Ash is the part of my son that he has been refusing to listen to for 3 years. She stood. "I'm not telling you what to do. I'm telling you what is happening so that you can make an informed decision about it." She left. Vesna sat for a long time with her tea going cold and the fire burning down and Ash breathing steadily on the floor. "You're not subtle," she told him. He opened one eye, then closed it again. She found the king in the east corridor on the 9th night, which was late enough that the torches had been turned down to their lowest, and the stone had the blue-gray quality of deep cold. He was standing at the window that overlooked the courtyard, not the one he'd been at when she arrived, a different one, facing north toward the border. She nearly turned back. She didn't. "The council will push again," she said. He didn't turn. "They will. What will you tell them?" A pause. "What I told them today. That there's no bond. Yes." She came to stand a few feet away, not beside him but near enough to see what he was looking at, which was the frost on the courtyard stones and the dark line of the tree break at the territory's edge. "Is that true?" she asked. The silence stretched. It was the kind of silence that has weight, not empty, not hostile, but full of something that had been held for a long time and was becoming difficult to hold. "I don't know," he said, and the flatness was gone from it. What was left was just the truth, unguarded, which was a different thing entirely. She looked at the courtyard, the pattern books, she said, the unfinished sequence. She was designing it for a child who didn't exist yet. She believed there would be one. She was optimistic. She was right about the warding logic. I've been testing the principles for 3 days, and they hold. She saw something that the guild hadn't seen in 2 generations. A pause. She was good at knowing things before they were confirmed. He turned from the window. She was closer than she'd realized. The corridor was narrow, and she drifted toward the light without noticing. He looked at her with the expression she'd been cataloging for 9 days, and she saw something in it that she hadn't seen before. Not neutrality, but the deliberate maintenance of neutrality, which is a different thing and much harder to sustain. "The commission will take the full 6 months," she said. "I know. I'm going to finish the unfinished sequence." "I know that, too." She looked at him for a moment. "Your wolf is asleep at my hearth." "Yes." "That's not nothing." He held her gaze. His jaw moved slightly, the way it did when he was choosing words with the particular care of someone who knows the weight of each one. "No," he said. "It's not nothing." She nodded once and went back down the corridor toward the weaving room. She did not look back. She heard behind her the sound of him standing at the window for a long time before his footsteps finally moved away. The council moved faster than she'd expected. On the 10th day, the man with the careful enunciation. She had learned his name was Aldrich, and that he had been on the council for 20 years and had opinions about bloodlines that he expressed as concerns, arrived at the weaving room door. He did not come in. Ash was at the hearth, and Ash had looked at him from the moment he appeared in the doorway with the particular quality of attention that suggested he was being assessed and found wanting. "The Guild Commission," Aldrich said. "I've been reviewing the original contract. The scope was agreed as 6 months, but there is a provision allowing the council to terminate on 30 days' notice if the work is deemed—" "Deemed what?" Vesna said. She did not look up from the loom. "Unnecessary, or if circumstances change. The frames are empty. The hall has been without warding for 3 years. She set down her shuttle and looked at him. What circumstances would make that unnecessary? He smiled the smile of someone who has made a career of smiling while saying difficult things. The council has concerns about the nature of the relationship developing between the guild worker and— "Say the rest of it plainly," she said. A pause. "The king's bond wolf has attached himself to you in pack law that carries implications that cannot be managed quietly if they are allowed to develop unchecked. The council's position is that a clean termination of the contract, handled now, before the king has to decide something publicly, before complications arise." She stood. She was not tall, but she had the posture of someone who had decided at some point that she would take up exactly as much space as she needed. "I have a commission," she said, "signed by the king. The hall needs warding. The work is not finished. If the council wants to terminate the contract, the council can bring that to the king in session, and I will attend that session, and I will speak." Aldrich looked at her, then at Ash, then at her again. "That would be irregular, Hentesha," he said. "So is terminating a commission because a wolf likes to sleep by a warm fire." He left. Ash watched him go. Then he put his chin back on his paws with the air of something that has done its job. Vesna sat back down at the loom. Her hands were steady. She noted that they were steady and was mildly surprised, and then she picked up her shuttle and went back to work. The king came to the weaving room that night, not late, early evening, while the light was still good, and the fire hadn't yet become the primary source of it. He knocked, which she had not expected. She had not heard him knock on anything before. "Come in," she said. He came in. He looked at the loom. The first full panel was nearly complete, the dark gold border and the beginning of the warded interior pattern. And something in his face changed in a way she'd learned to watch for. Not much, just a fraction. Aldrich came to see you, he said. He did. What did he say? He suggested the council might invoke the termination clause. She kept working. I told him if they wanted to do that, they could do it in session with me present. A pause. You don't have the right to attend a council session. I know. I said it anyway. He looked at her for a moment. Then he crossed the room and stood near the hearth, not far from where Ash was lying, though not so close that it seemed deliberate, and looked at the panel on the loom. The border pattern, he said. It's the same as the original. It's an extension of her logic. I'm not copying it. I'm continuing it. The way you'd continue a sentence someone else started if you understood what they were trying to say. He was quiet for a moment. Can you do that? Continue something that was someone else's? I've been doing it for 9 days. She glanced up at him. You gave me the pattern books. I did. That was a choice. Yes. She set down her shuttle. The fire crackled. Ash breathed. Outside the wind had picked up, which meant the temperature had dropped, which meant the frost would be harder by morning. Lady Marit told me about the bondwolf, Shugsos, she said. What it means when one stops sleeping. He looked at the fire. My mother talks. She told me because she thought I should know, not to pressure me, to inform me. There's a difference. I know the difference. Do you? She turned on her stool to face him properly. Because the council is trying to remove me before you have to make a decision, and you haven't told them not to. You told them the wolf's habits aren't a council matter, which is true, but you haven't said anything about what they are. He turned from the fire and looked at her. The careful neutrality was there, but thinner now. She could see the effort of it, the way you can see the structure of something through worn fabric. What would you have me say? He said. The truth, she said. Whatever it is. The silence stretched. This one was different from the corridor silence, tighter, more pressurized, the kind that happens when two people are standing close enough that the next word will change the shape of the room. I don't know what it is yet, he said. That's the truth. Then say that. To the council? To me. He looked at her. His jaw moved slightly. I don't know what this is, he said. I know that Ash has slept for 9 days. I know that I have not. That I haven't come into a room and wanted to stay in it for 3 years. I know that you looked at Alara's pattern books and understood them, and that no one else who's come to this keep in 3 years has understood anything about what this place is missing. A pause. I don't know what to do with that. You don't have to do anything with it yet, she said. I'm here for 6 months. The council, I told Aldrich I'd attend the session. I meant it. She picked up her shuttle. Let them try. Something moved in his expression. Not quite a smile. Close enough. The first time she'd seen anything like it on his face, and it changed him entirely, briefly, before he put it away again. You're not afraid of them, he said. I'm afraid of plenty of things. Aldrich isn't one of them. He looked at her for a moment longer. Then he looked at Ash. The wolf's eyes were open, watching the king with the particular attention of something that has been waiting for a specific moment and is now watching it arrive. He was hers first, the king said quietly. Did my mother tell you that? Yes. She found him on the border road. He was half dead, and she put him in her apron and carried him home. A pause. He transferred his loyalty when she died. I didn't ask him to. He just came to me, and I thought that was grief. I thought he was grieving the way I was grieving, and that we were both just enduring it together. And now, he looked at Ash, then at her. And now I think he was waiting, he said. I think he knew something I didn't. and he was patient about it, and he was right. She held his gaze. That's a significant thing to say. Yes. It doesn't obligate me to anything. I know that. I came here for a commission. I didn't come here for— I know, he said. I'm not asking you for anything. I'm just saying what is true. Because you asked me to. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned back to the loom. Then I'll say what's true too, she said. I've been here 9 days, and I haven't wanted to leave. I don't know what to do with that either. He stood by the fire for a while longer. She worked. Ash breathed. The frost tightened outside, and the room held its warmth, and eventually the king said goodnight and left, and the door closed quietly behind him. And Vesna sat at her loom and felt the shape of something that did not yet have a name. Tagdraus. The council session was on the 12th day. She attended. She walked in behind the king, which was not protocol, and sat in the chair that no one had placed there for her. She had placed it herself that morning, before anyone arrived, and Aldrich looked at her with the expression of a man who has been outmaneuvered by someone he underestimated, which was an expression she had seen before and found instructive. The king said nothing about her presence. He simply sat, and she sat, and the session began. Aldrich raised the matter of the commission. He raised it carefully, in the language of procedure and precedent, and he was good at it. She could see why he'd been on the council for 20 years. He made the termination sound like a kindness, like the reasonable management of a complicated situation. She let him finish. Then she said, "The warding on this hall has been absent for 3 years. In that time, 2 border disputes have gone to arbitration that the old wards would have prevented. The pack sickness in the eastern quarter last autumn, I've read the steward's records, followed the same pathways that the old warding was designed to interrupt. The commission is not decorative, it is structural, and the work is not finished." Silence. Furthermore, she said, the termination clause requires that the work be deemed unnecessary. I've just explained why it isn't. If the council has a different argument, I'd like to hear it plainly. Aldrich looked at the king. The king looked at Aldrich. The concern, Aldrich said, with the careful enunciation, is not the work itself. I know what the concern is, she said. The concern is that the king's bond wolf has attached himself to me, and the council doesn't know what to do about it. That's a reasonable thing to be uncertain about. It is not a reason to remove a commission that this territory needs. She looked at him steadily. If the king decides there is a bond, that is the king's decision to make. It is not the council's, and it is certainly not a reason to empty the hole again. She stopped talking. The room was very quiet. The king said, into that quiet, "The commission stands. The weaver stays." And then, after a pause that had weight in it, "And the council will note for the record that Ash has not slept in 3 years, and that he is sleeping. That is not nothing. I expect it to be treated accordingly." Aldrich said nothing. The session ended. She walked out. The king walked out. In the corridor he stopped, and she stopped, and they stood for a moment in the particular aftermath of a thing that has been said publicly and cannot be unsaid. "Thank you," he said. "I meant everything I said." "I know. So did I." She looked at him. "You said it was not nothing." "I said it in front of 7 witnesses." "Yes," she said. "You did." She went back to the weaving room. She sat down at the loom and looked at the panel. The border complete now, the interior pattern half formed. And she thought about what it meant to continue something someone else had started, to understand the logic of it well enough to extend it, to make decisions the original maker hadn't made yet, and to make them in the same spirit. She picked up her shuttle. The thread was warm in her hands. On the 14th day, she finished the first panel. She took it down from the loom in the early morning before anyone was about, spread it on the floor, and sat with it the way she'd sat with the Queen's tapestry in the storeroom. It was good work. She could see where she'd made decisions that differed from what the Queen would have made, and she could see that the decisions were sound, different but sound. The logic held. Ash came and sat beside her and looked at it. "What do you think?" she asked. He put his nose to the border, breathed in, then sat back and looked at her with those iron-colored eyes that were, she had decided, not quite the same color as the king's, but close, the same family of gray, the same quality of attention. "Right," she said. "Me too." She rolled the panel carefully and began preparing for the second. Ceremony happened on the 20th day. It was not the council's doing, in the end. It was the king's. He called it himself, in the great hall, with the pack assembled the way they assembled for significant announcements. She had not been told it was happening. She had been in the weaving room when the steward came to the door and said, with the expression of someone delivering news that is surprising even to him, "My lord requests your presence in the great hall." She came in through the side door, which was how she'd come in the first time, and the hall was full. The senior pack members, the household staff, the council, Lady Marit in the front row, with the expression of someone who has been waiting for this and is not going to let it show. The first panel was mounted. She saw it when she came in. The dark gold border, the warded interior, hung in the east frame where the light caught it. It looked like it had always been there. It looked like it belonged. The king was at the front of the hall. Ash was at his side, standing, which she'd learned meant he was attentive. She walked down the length of the hall. She was aware of the pack watching her. Not hostile, not the assessment of the first day, but something different. Something that had been shifting for 20 days and had finally settled into a shape. She stopped in front of the king. He looked at her, then at the hall. Then he said, in the voice he used when he was speaking to all of them at once, 3 years ago this hall lost its warding and its weaver. I closed the commission because I could not. I did not know how to open it again." A pause. Vesna of the Weavers' Guild came to Ironhall 20 days ago. She has not only continued the work, she has understood it. She has extended it in the same spirit it was begun, and the hall is better for her presence in it. He stopped. Then he said, more quietly, but still in the voice that carried, "Ash has slept for 20 nights. For those who understand what that means, it means what you think it means. And I am naming it, because the alternative is to leave it unnamed, and I have done that for long enough." He looked at her. "I'm not asking you to decide anything today," he said. "I'm asking you to let me say, in front of witnesses, that you are here, that you belong here, and that whatever this is, I am not going to pretend it isn't happening." The hall was very quiet. She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, in the voice she used when she was being precise, "You gave me the pattern books. You let me into the storeroom. You came to the kitchen when you couldn't sleep, and you sat at the table and you didn't explain yourself." She paused. "I've been here for 20 days, and I have not wanted to leave. That is also naming something." Something moved in his expression, more than a fraction this time. He didn't put it away. "Then stay," he said. "I have 4 more panels to weave," she said. "After that." "Ask me after that," she said, "when the hall is finished." Not quite a smile. Close enough. He nodded once. Behind him Ash sat down, and then, with the deliberate gravity of something that has been waiting 20 days to complete a thing it started. The wolf put his chin on his paws and closed his eyes. The hall breathed. Lady Marit, in the front row, looked at the ceiling briefly with the expression of someone who is not going to cry in public and is managing it narrowly. She finished the 5th panel on the last day of the 2nd month. The hall had been rehung in stages, each panel as it was completed, so that the warding built incrementally, the way it was designed to. By the time the 5th went up, the hall felt different, warmer, not in temperature, in the way that a room feels different when it has been completed, when the thing it was always supposed to hold is finally in it. She stood in the middle of the hall and looked at all 5 panels and felt the particular satisfaction of a finished thing. The king came in. He had developed the habit of coming to the hall in the evenings, which she had noticed and not commented on. He came in, looked at the panels, and came to stand beside her. "It's done," she said. "Yes. The warding will need to be checked every 3 years. The threadwork is stable, but the ward singing needs renewal." She paused. "You'll need someone who knows the method." "I know. I could write it down, the full method, so that whoever you commission next—" "Vesna," she stopped. "I asked you to stay," he said. "You said to ask you when the hall was finished." She looked at the panels, the dark gold border, the warded interior, the unfinished sequence the queen had started, completed now in a hand that was different but had understood what the original was reaching for. "Your mother told me Alara was optimistic," she said. She was. She was designing for a child who didn't exist yet. Yes. The sequence I finished, I made decisions she hadn't made. I chose the pattern for the center panel. I chose what it was warding for. He looked at her. "What did you choose?" "Continuity," she said. The old word for it in the pattern language is the same as the word for belonging. They're the same concept. In the older notation, she turned to look at him. "I didn't choose it because it was convenient. I chose it because it was the right answer to what she was asking." He held her gaze. His jaw moved. "And what are you asking?" "I'm asking if you mean it," she said. "Not the public declaration. I know you meant that. I'm asking if you mean the rest of it. The kitchen at midnight, the pattern books, the way you came to the storeroom door and didn't come in." She looked at him steadily. "I'm asking if you see me. Not the commission, not the wolf's choice. Me." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I see a woman who sat on the floor of my storeroom for 2 hours with my dead wife's tapestry and treated it like it mattered, who told my counsel to say the rest of it plainly, who finished a sequence that had been unfinished for 3 years and chose the right word for it without being told what the word was." A pause. "I see you. I have been seeing you since the 2nd day. I have been trying to do it carefully. You've been doing it carefully for 20 days. I know." "That's long enough," she said. He looked at her. The careful neutrality was gone entirely. What was left was just him, the exhaustion and the grief, and the 3 years of holding everything at a careful distance. And underneath all of it, something that had been waiting with the patience of something that does not require permission to exist. "Yes," he said, "it is." Ash was at the door. He had followed the king in, as he always did, and he was lying across the threshold with his chin on his paws and his eyes closed. The work was done. They were married in the great hall on the first morning of spring, which is when the frost finally releases its hold on the northern reaches and the light comes back at an angle that makes the stone look like something other than endurance. The 5 panels hung on the walls. The warding was complete. The hall was full. The pack, the council, Lady Mara in the front row, with the expression of someone who has been right about something for a long time and is choosing not to say so. Vesna wore her own clothes, because she had not brought ceremonial ones and had declined the offer of the keep's wardrobe. She wore the dark wool she worked in, with the gild's thread at the cuffs, the small mark that said what she was and where she'd come from, and that she was not going to pretend otherwise. The king stood at the front of the hall and looked at her, the way he'd looked at the pattern books when she'd told him she could finish the unfinished sequence, with the particular attention of someone who has understood that a thing they thought was lost can be continued. The ceremony was short. Pack ceremonies are not elaborate. They are precise. The words are old, and they mean what they say. And when they were done, he took her hand, and the hall went quiet in the way halls go quiet when something has been true for a long time and has finally been said out loud. Ash was at the king's heel. He had been standing for the ceremony, attentive, present, the way he stood when the king was not at ease. But when the words were done and the hands were held, the wolf sat. And then, slowly, with the deliberate gravity that was entirely his own, he put his chin on his paws and closed his eyes. The pack saw it. Lady Marette, in the front row, looked at the ceiling again. She was managing it less narrowly this time. That evening they sat in the kitchen, the three of them, which was now the usual configuration, because Berta had made something she said needed to be eaten while it was warm, and neither of them had argued. Ash was at the hearth. His sides moved slowly. His eyes were closed. Vesna looked at the king across the table. He was eating the thing Berta had made, and actually tasting it, she thought. There was a quality of attention to it that hadn't been there in the early days. "The heir's room," she said. "The sequence I finished. It's designed for a room that doesn't exist yet." He looked at her. "We could build it. That seems like a significant undertaking. Most of the important ones are." She looked at him for a moment. "You're not afraid of it." "I'm afraid of plenty of things," he said. "That's not one of them." She recognized her own words. She let them sit there between them, which was where they belonged. Berta moved around them both without comment, which was what she always did, which was the right thing. Outside, the spring was doing what spring does in the northern reaches, which is arrive slowly and mean it. The frost was going. The light was changing. The hall above them held its warding, and the patterns on the walls continued something that had been started by someone who had known things before they were confirmed, and had been right. Ash breathed by the fire. The work was done. "Pack, here's what I want to know." The wolf knew before the king did. He chose her on the first day, and he waited, and he was patient, and he was right. But she had to ask the king to see her himself, not through the wolf, not through the bond, but in his own voice, with his own eyes. Do you think that distinction mattered? That she needed him to choose her separately from the wolf's choosing? Tell me in the comments, and if someone in your life is still sleeping at a distance when they should have come in from the cold, share this with them. That's the best kind of gift this story can be. I'll see you in the next one.